So what are we going to talk about? You probably are wondering, what has bullying got to do with transformation? And my take on it is that we and yourselves as HR people, we've got to bring humanity back to organizations. Because what is happening in organizations today, there is such a level of toxicity that it actually impacts on transformation, it impacts on the spear, what Ngao spoke about, on performance. And I'm also curious to hear after this conversation that we're going to have as to what your view is on workplace bullying. So maybe just to start, one of the reasons bullying is so difficult to talk about within organizations is it is probably where sexual harassment was 30, 40 years ago. Nowadays, when you speak about sexual harassment, people know exactly what you're talking about. But when you talk about bullying, some certain things happen. So I'm just going to ask you, with the person next to you, please just share with one another what comes to mind when you hear bullying in the context of the workplace. Talk to the person next to you. You're going to work, so this time I'm not just going to be talking, we're going to interact. Talk to the person next to you quite quickly. If you don't have anybody to speak to the two gentlemen, please join somebody, just make sure that you have a person to speak to. And please only speak about bullying, not anything else, about where you're going to meet later on for drinks. Okay, let's bring it back. Any thoughts? 3 people by show of hands, please stand up and say, yes, ma'am. And whoever has the mic has got to run very, very. Where's the green shirt lady or Mr. Facilitator? We need a mic here. Okay. Already. Oh. We're starting with mics.
Starting with questions before the statement. Okay, Doc. Hi. Sorry.
So what comes to mind when you hear of bullying within the workplace?
With my colleague, we thought of someone who does not adhere to the principles and the regulations around the workplace. Some people in the management who will not respect others' people's principles and boundaries, It's not about fighting and all that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Somebody else? There's that gentleman there.
Doctor, good afternoon. Colleagues, good afternoon. We shared the fact that you are given timelines and you are requested to...
Just for the camera, that side, thank you, sorry.
Okay. We're saying that you are given short timelines to be able to deliver on something, irrespective whether you are comfortable to do that or not. And in most cases, you will find that you are told that give an approval on this thing, otherwise you're out of job.
Okay, all right. Okay, so thank you very much for indulging me on that. One of the things that I was asked to come and speak to you about was because the vision of IPM is a portal of thought leadership in people management. And one of the things that they asked me to do, or one of the things that they were looking for, is research that has been done in South Africa and to share with you. So surprise, surprise, I did research. My PhD research was on workplace bullying, but I looked specifically on the organizational factors which make bullying prevalent and why, what the impact is. And there's a whole story around why would I ever want to do work or research on workplace bullying, which I'm happy to share with you later on. So something that has 300 pages. I'm going to try to condense and share it with you in 20 minutes and try to make it as interesting as possible, because scholarly things sometimes can be quite dry, but I promise you I'm trying not to go to make it dry. So what I'm going to share with you is the background and research motivation. Why workplace bullying, the purpose of the research, the objectives, scope and approach, but mainly I'd like to spend more time on key findings and why I'm speaking to you about my research today. So one of the things that actually made me do research on workplace bullying, I was employed as a head of change management in some fine institution in the country, and my experience was very, very bad. And the one time, I remember on the Friday evening, I drove home and actually sat in front of my computer, thanks to Google, and I put in words of what happened. And to my surprise, boom, what I was experiencing actually had a name, and its name was workplace bullying. My first reaction was, no ways, I cannot be bullied, because we tend to associate people that are bullied with people that are weak. First of all, I do not think that I'm weak. I do not think I speak for myself, and as far as work is concerned, I believe that I perform. I'm a performer. So why would I be a victim? So that was what happened. And actually, I got more and more curious into this whole phenomena called workplace bullying, and I did a whole lot of reading, and I found that there wasn't much research in South Africa around bullying, and I decided there and then that's the one thing I'd like to do, because at my experience, I took it as how not to be a leader, that when I become a leader, this is not how I'm going to lead. So that is one of the things that led me to dive deep into this phenomena. The other thing is that the focus of all your research was on definition, on defining what bullying means, or looking at prevalence, or looking at the characteristics of the people that were either being bullied or people that were bullying. The other thing is that what also troubled me was that the research that was done on prevalence used survey with predetermined behaviors. So I was much more interested in finding out from a subjective point of view, from a subjective experience, what people actually would define as their own experiences or the attributes of bullying. And therefore, the other thing is that I also wanted to look at, what the impact is, not just on the individual, but on the organization. The other thing was that most of the research tended to look at the individual. So I was, as I said, interested at looking at the organization, specifically around those factors that make bullying likely to occur. So this was what the background was, also because some of the literature that I looked at showed that, the bullying and how people react to it and how they define it is very directly related to the direct environment. Yes, you're still with me? All right. So what is then, one of the things that I found was that there was a problem with bullying, and the problem was that there's no universally agreed to definition of what it is like. That was one of the things that I found. And the other thing was that there was a fine line between bullying and other negative acts at work, like your sexual harassment or discrimination, and so on and so forth. And another important thing for me also was that most of the research was done from the Western countries. So I felt that, and one of the things that I said earlier that I subscribe to is that context matter. Even though you may be dealing with the same phenomena, but it would be different based on the context. So it was important for me to actually do a study that looked at addressing or researching this phenomenon from a South African context. So, the little bit that I found, and this was as early as the early 2000s, in 2019, the little research that I found that was done already said a lot of people said that bullying was on the rise in South African workplaces. Up to 77.8 South Africans that were surveyed in a study that was done by Stanman in 2000 already showed that there was bullying prevalent within the South African workplace. However, not many people knew about it. Even people that were bullying, or those that were bullying, did not know that actually this was what was happening to them. So that was some of the early results. And in a study that was later done in 2012, it showed again that there's a prevalence. But what the study showed was that the impact, how people were being bullied, the manner in which they were bullied, differed according to their socioeconomic demographics. And the more I tried and wanted to read, I found that there was not much that was that was done in South Africa in this phenomena. So this is why I set out to do that. And very quickly, I wanted to investigate those things, investigate, analyze, and describe how bullying is perceived. Also look at what are the kinds of things that make people to feel that, to describe whatever it is that they're experiencing as being bullied. And what I did then is I focused on three participants, types of groupings of participants. On the targets, what you would ordinarily call them victims, and after my own experience, I decided not to call them victims, but to call them targets of bullying. And I also researched, part of my participants were HR professionals. And the third category was what I call bystanders. And bystanders are those people who are not bullied, but witness bullying and do nothing about it. And I'm just wondering, even in this room, how many of us are actually bystanders. I'm so sorry, I wish I could have heard Matata Tsedu's talk. It looked like he actually had a provoking talk. And my question to you, to us people sitting around here, is to what extent are we bystanders, not just in bullying, but in terms of transformation? Because we supposedly we are supposed to know the legislation, we are supposed to be the custodians of the policies around transformation, but are we actually active in driving that, or are we bystanders, as long as it doesn't affect us? So that's one of the questions I'd like to actually come back and revisit and have a conversation around, so what? What does it mean if we are indeed bystanders? These are the objectives which are similar to the reasons, the purpose, and these are the questions I'm skipping because I'd like to spend a little more time on the key findings. This is just, again, I'm just not going to go into it, but this is the framework I used. Essentially, the author there said that when these three things are in place, bullying is likely. And she said one of them is motivating structures and processes. These are things like internal competition, rewards, the reward system, how we reward people. That may create competition and may create some kind of dissatisfaction. The other is what she called precipitating processes, the whole thing about restructuring and crisis. And nowadays, all organizations are constantly restructuring. And we know that what comes with restructuring often is jostling for positions, and I'll talk more a little bit about it when it comes to findings. Under precipitating processes are other organizational changes, changes in management and work group, and the last thing on the bottom is enabling structures and processes. So these are the things that, if those three things and the factors underneath there are present in the organization, they make bullying likely. So what I did is I tested this, and I took this and structured questions around those and essentially went into the organization, into the field, to ask questions of the three groups, the targets, HR practitioners, and bystanders. And how I did that, because there's something, because as I said, we do not have a universally agreed definition, I use this definition for my study. And why I use that is that I wanted to focus on organizational factors. It is important when you look at that definition, the occurrences have got to be repeated and over time. Therefore, as in sexual harassment, once-off occurrences would not characterize bullying. Yes, still good with, am I still with you so far? All right. Let's now go to the findings. The interesting things that I found about HR professionals were quite interesting. First, there was a notion that HR professionals are actually colluding with management to make bullying possible within organizations. That was the first thing. The other thing is that as the more I spoke with HR professionals, they also then themselves turned and said that they were targets of, I found that they said that they were targets of bullying themselves. Targets of bullying either from management or targets of bullying from staff. They said that they found themselves in the middle. And the other thing that I looked at, the other question I asked was, what do HR professionals do in the context of bullying? And they said that they had nothing. They had no guidance because they did not have policies to deal with bullying. And the other thing was that none of the people actually that came and put in, what do you call it? To file, what do you call it again? Grievances, yes. That came to put in grievances. None of them were bullying specific, spoke about bullying. So they said that they had no way of dealing with bullying. When I asked in general what kind of support organizations provided, and I think the answer is not surprising. These are what they said, that they are, while there were wellness and employee assistance programs that created some kind of support to the grievances that people did. The information in red, these are the things that verbatim that I took that people actually said. And one of the problems that we have within our organizations is that people who are specialists, who are good at what they do as specialists, often get promoted to positions of leadership, and yet they are not leaders. So and this is what then tends to happen, is that they lead through coercion, by coercing, it's my way or the highway. And that's one of the things that they said often lead to bullying situations. This is a quote which I found quite interesting because, and the more I spoke with people, the more I realized that in South Africa especially, because there's a depth of research in workplace bullying, we tend to associate bullying with children, with school. We never think about bullying within the context of the workplace. So this is a quote that I took where somebody was saying that, first of all, they were surprised when they were asked to come, when I asked them to come and speak to me about this topic within the organization. But then the more we spoke, the more she realized that, in fact, this phenomenon does exist. And she actually said that we never talk about it because we don't know that it exists, or we don't think about it within the context of the workplace. The other key findings from the target's perspective was that the one big thing that went across was the association of bullying with power. That most of the bullying came from people from positions of power. And here also, just power, it's not power about positions. In some instances, power came from association. And I remember one of the one of the people I spoke with said that one of the bullies was actually powerful because she was the wife of the COO. And her power came from the fact that she was part of the in-group. So one of the things, the earlier things that Ngani spoke about, the whole thing about social identity. So she was part of the in-group by virtue of her association with her spouse. The other big finding was there was a big, what I call societal context, because the framework that I spoke about referred to other things, but within the context of South Africa, the whole thing about transformation became also figural in the findings. Thing about race and gender. And certain people feeling that they are being bullied by virtue of their race or their gender. So it also spoke to a whole thing about transformation and what people perceived transformation to represent. For example, some people feeling that people were being put in positions by virtue of who they are, what they are, and not necessarily what they can do. And in terms of just the other thing that came was that the most form of bullying was around verbal abuse, about unfair criticism and being undermined. And remember, I said that bullying, as opposed to sexual harassment, this happens repeated over a period of time. And then the other thing also that they said was that even though they could report, there was always no action against the bullies. So I'd like to stop and pause and do our thing again. Just talk to the person next to you again. What does this say? What are your thoughts in relation to the organization that you may be coming from, or what you know, what you're observing in your workplace? So if you could just take 1 or 2 minutes and just talking to the person next to you. How much more time? How much? About 10 minutes. Maybe 15? Okay. So, can we just have popcorn, 1 or 2 comments? What does bullying have to do with transformation, or what your thoughts are so far? Yes, sir.
Just hold on. Can you stand up, please? Because we want the camera people to get a full shot of you talking. Thank you.
And please, when you speak, I know we are Africans, we are, what do they say, oratory people. No long stories, sharp and sweet.
I'm sharing my colleague's experience on bullying at the workplace. He says his immediate supervisor would give him instructions after hours, asking for a report without tools like a laptop and stuff like that, and saying, if I don't get this report by 7 a.m., heads are going to roll. That's his experience.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for sharp and sweet. And you've got a good spokesperson. It's interesting that you chose for him to speak for you. But yes.
Hi. My colleague and I, earlier on, we defined bullying as abuse of power. Mm-hmm. And now we were just talking, and I was just sharing with him that I think I've experienced gender and race. I've experienced undermining. Mm-hmm. And he was just sharing that it's perhaps because of the apartheid era, where, females were not necessarily supposed to have certain jobs, and the fact that, I work in a, white-dominated company. So, I find myself having to fend myself and being tough, and I'm told to tough up.
Okay.
So, yeah, basically
all right.
that's...
Okay, so what is the moral of the story so far? What do you think what I've been talking about matters, and why do you think it matters as far as transformation is concerned? I saw a hand there. Again, sharp and sweet. If you go, I'm going to bully you and ask you to summarize.
A leadership role, and most of us seeing that area as someone bullying. But what is critical is for us as practitioners to understand that bullying is two ways, because that specialist, because of the nature of her experience, she should not be allowed to leave things to fall apart because of she's on a leadership position. But what is critical is the approach for people who feel that they are bullied.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much also for being sharp and sweet. I think what you're saying, the latter part of what you're saying is important, is the approach. And then here's the difference. When you're a leader, you of course, when you become a leader, you also going to be there's going to be a path from a specialist path, which actually makes you to get to the role of a leader. But a leader by very nature, you manage what we call today knowledge workers, which means you manage people that know more than you, and so they should. What your role is to provide the direction, is to provide the strategy. So there's a distinction between the leadership role and the specialist role. So this is why I actually like your last comment where you said it is the approach. The approach, but that must also be backed by competence. You knowing and understanding what being a leader is. I see you really, really forcing me to say sharp and sweet, and then I'll go.
A very good day to you. My name is...
I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you. I can't see through that. I said, "Sir, my apologies." I didn't see.
Thanks for that. A very good day to you. My name is Ntabise Mwenyepao, the author of The Workplace, Another Terrain for Struggle. I've been a target of bullying, and I thought it wise and fitting to write about it so that we can create awareness around adult bullying, but also to create platforms for people to start talking about bullying, particularly in the workplace, but also to bring it to people's attention that bullies are equally victims of circumstances. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Munyepa. And now I recall you. You wrote to me. I'm going to see you after this. Okay, thanks for reaching out. All right, let me just go quickly so that we wrap up. You've been promised that you're going to go home early. So these were the key findings from the bystanders' perspective. And one of the key things that they said was that bullying happens as a result of culture, the culture of the organization. So it may be, I mean, one of the things that I said earlier was that even when bullies were reported, nothing ever gets done. So it's a culture of looking the other way. And it happens in many ways. In my previous role as an executive, in one of my previous roles, one of the biggest bully, if I would say that, from Exco was his business was the best performing. So what happened? We looked, everybody turned to look aside because the person the company was the best performing from a numbers point of view, which meant that then at the time, as the HR director, it meant for me to actually stand up to have courageous conversations about this, because while this person might be producing the numbers, is it sustainable in the sense that some of the best talent that we had started to leave. So it's more around, it's the whole thing about, do you do the right thing? Do you become courageous for the big of the whole? Because you may be winning right now, but ultimately from a long-term point of view, you may not be winning. So that also brings a whole lot of responsibilities to everybody, but specifically and especially the human professionals. So bystanding, so this is unfortunately the world as we know it today. So many of us, unless we are affected, we don't get involved. That's what being a bystander is. Or you hope that somebody else is actually going to stand and do something about it. Or we take pictures. You know, how many times have we seen horrific things being done and nobody actually intervening, instead taking pictures, and tomorrow, the following morning when we wake up, we see all these viral videos going viral with us not taking responsibility. So this is just a quick summary on what the bystander, what the outcome is. And as I said, the role one was a passive accomplice. As a bystander, you see something happening, you don't do anything about it. You say, I'm just going to keep quiet because as long as it's not happening to me. Even though we're talking about bullying here, it also is the same applies to transformation. When we're seeing certain things, we have, us as employment equity, as HR professionals, you have employment equity plans, which says this is the nature, the demographic of the profile of our organization should look like. And when people go out and appoint outside of the employment equity plan, what do we do? Are we bystanders, or do we take an active role? The second role outcome was that is a bystander, that's an change agent. These are the people that move from being just an accomplice to actually doing something and intervening and trying to do something to stop whatever is happening, the bullying. Half the time, and the people, the change, the role, bystander number two, what happened is they said they ended up being targets themselves, because when they intervened to try to stop the bullying, they ended up being bullied themselves. These are, I'm not going to go through them, you can have a look, and some of them we've spoken about up to so far. These are some of the things, the key findings as far as the nature of bullying is concerned. So bullying came in this matter, in this manner. So these are some of the characteristics. Again, the key dominant feature being that these things happen over time, and it was not just a once-off situation. And these are some of the tactics that the bullies made, and again, the reds are the specific things that people said where, for example, one of the tactic, and we all know, we probably have experienced such leaders who is always constantly my way or the highway. You do what I say or you're out of here. Somebody already said, sir, your example, also being constantly threatened with being fired and being excluded from information and so on and so forth. Again, these, what I also found, because one of the questions that I asked was, what is the difference between bullying and other forms of negative acts at work? And the main reason, at the center of it, was that bullying is very difficult to prove in most instances. Whereas sexual harassment, it is, you don't even almost like have to prove it. It's more around, because it's known, because we have policies within the organization that drive that, and we're back to legislation again, you actually have some kind of a recourse, whereas this is not the case with bullying. It is difficult to prove, and also because there is no shared understanding of what bullying is. So which then means that the role where HR can come into, if you're talking about legislation and the policies, is for us to, actually put in place policies which define what bullying is in the context of our own organization. These other things I've already spoken about. Persistence with bullying, the difference is it has to happen over a period of time, whereas with sexual harassment, a once-off is also constituted as harassment, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go through that. I'm rushing because I see time is running out. But if I'm going too fast, please stop me. These are the findings as far as the key findings on the organizational antecedents factors. Remember, I showed you that model, the motivating structures. These are some of the things what people said was also part of the source of the bullying. When there's internal competition, competing for positions, chasing the targets to the detriment of collaboration and teamwork. And the other was on reward and expected benefits. Some of I looked at the financial services and the manufacturing industry. In the manufacturing industry, I also talked to people that we would typically, what we regard to as blue collar. So you have people who were drivers who would go and drive forever, for hours, and knowing that this is due, over time. This is what is due to me, and that those rewards were held back and not given to them, and people being afraid to challenge because they're afraid to lose their jobs. Very quickly, some of the precipitating some processes in terms of that model, the whole thing around restructuring and crisis, because there's always restructuring. Our organizations are in perpetual restructuring, and what happens is that there's also a whole lot of backstabbing as people jostle for positions, because when we restructure maybe some of the positions being shrunk and being taken away, there's a whole lot of things that happen around that jostling for positions. And in terms of the enabling structures and processes, there was the whole thing about power. Power has always been central. And again, power within the context of position and power within the context of by association. And the imbalance, the power imbalance being that if you are the target and you are being bullied by somebody either in a position of power or having power by association, that imbalance actually made the targets, they said, afraid to suck it up, basically, because people felt that they had nowhere else to go. This also was one of the biggest thing, the role of culture. And what is the role of culture specifically around tolerance for bullying behavior, the management style. So you find that more and more organizations that I spoke with in my organization at the time, there has just been a culture of tolerance for bad behavior, to the extent that even when you reported it, nothing actually happened. And most of the time, in most instances, most of the targets, there was a culture of fear of speaking out, because they were fearful for whatever reasons, perhaps, for example, to lose their work, their job. So again, I'm not sure if you're going to make these slides are going to be made available, but so that you can have a look at them. But these are some of this is actually the biggest finding to that, and this is what they would call a contribution to what was already existing. And I think I've already spoken about it, the role of societal context, because South Africa, there's a big story and narrative around gender and race. It also showed in my study, and these are some of the things, the newer things that actually came out from a societal context, and then what the biggest contribution was also part of that. So my improvement, essentially the addition to the existing model, was that there are also societal issues that should be taken into account. In the context of South Africa, there were three: social context, economic context, and political context. And these are some of the things that were there. Contribution, I'd like to, and so the concluding remarks really is that this phenomenon exists, and it's almost like it's a silent killer because nobody speaks about it. So the question, therefore, is, what does it mean for us as HR professionals? What do you think is your role from an HR point of view to actually do something about this? And you can actually liken and almost like triangulate it to everything, whether it be transformation, whether it be the kind of values that you want to drive, you can actually triangulate it to that. So I'd like to stop and with the question, so what? So what does it mean? And it's more like a call for action from the professionals. What then? What does it mean? Now that we know what we know, what does it mean for us as HR professionals? There's already been a suggestion that has been made, partnering with some of the institutions around, formulating legislation direction at the level of Parliament, for example. And does this warrant something for us to do something about, to bring back humanity into the organization, and humanity being essentially the foundation for all, whether it be transformation to happen. And this picture, I actually took it out. The words is how one target actually described the bully, and he said he's like an octopus sitting in a tank and spewing that blue ink, which is contaminating the entire tank, which essentially is the organization in this context. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been like this whole day.
No, I still haven't caught to this.
So is there just two questions for Dr. Ngao Motsei? Just two? Yeah, you got a question? Is your hand up? No? Nobody? I think it's because, there we go. One. Can you stand up, please? Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm sorry I arrived late in the presentation, but I find it quite intriguing. The only question I have is whether the study was only in the private sector or was an inclusion of both public and private sector.
Okay, so thank you for asking me the easiest question. It was in the private sector only.
That's it. No further questions?
Yeah.
There we go. Hold on.
Thanks a lot for the informative presentation on your research. Just my question from my side, as a policy guidance as for us, because we don't have any guidelines or policies driven within our company. And just from you, because you did a study, maybe just a note that we can take as HR practitioners within our workplace, and so far as how do we manage bullying? Because when one comes and saying I'm being bullied, and we ask questions, how do you define that as bullying? And we find that even the victim or the person who has experienced that can't even explain, then the grievances are just left like that. And for me, it's becoming that even employees are even afraid to come to us to come and say, I've been bullied, because of they be question asked, what did you do? What happened? What transpired? And individuals can't really explain that. So I just wanted your advice on that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I mean, one of the things that you can look at is, in fact, at least as things stand now in South Africa, is that bullying is dealt with under the sexual harassment policy. So even when you go to look at the CCMA sheet, where it speaks about sexual harassment, it defines bullying, but it defines it within the context of sexual harassment. So that perhaps might be a good starting point. But what I'm actually moving and inviting us to do and recommending is actually to lift it out. And in the same way, the only way we actually are going to create awareness is if we deal with it in its own, in its own merit, not within the ambit of sexual harassment. But that's a starting point. And from there, then you can then take it and say, within our company, within the context of how it's been defined as within the sexual harassment policy, then we can define it this way. And you could do a whole lot of things, inviting participation and input from your organization in various ways, as a starting point, for example.
I think
does that answer your question? Okay.
I think part of what I wanted to ask has been addressed now, but I'm of a view that we need to start reforms that will really address that outside the spectrum of sexual harassment, because it gets convoluted into that and it becomes something that is not.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, 90% of us sitting here, we experience that every day, especially in the spectrum of HR, where you are really supposed to listening to Matata Tsedi earlier on, and what you now saying, you typically become disempowered, because there's nothing that talks to that. You can't prove it. Sometimes it comes in a manner that is not necessarily direct, and you end up becoming disempowered to do anything. But I wanted to say, maybe we need to start saying, with the studies that you've done, and I know the person asked the question within the public sector, are we doing something? Have we done the research? My wife works in the public sector, and sometimes when she comes home, talking about the harassment that they get, and I feel like I want to go and represent her in that era and say, you can't go through this on a daily basis. So I am seriously saying this is a very topical issue, and we cannot just, I don't think we've done justice to it now, and we can't just, it's something that is closer to my heart, because also we were talking about it with my colleague. We go through that every day. And I don't know what to say. So we relying on the studies that you have started, and how we expand it, and how we start reforms that can really start the revolution around making this an issue and getting it addressed. Because what I go to work for is to be able to be productive and be able to do work. But sometimes you end up even being afraid to go to work, because You don't know. Something might happen on that day, and somebody who's bullying you wins on that day because they have a bigger weight than your weight. So I've said a lot of things, but I'm just saying, let's add on what you have done, and let's see how we make that alive and revolutionize this issue.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are you now clapping me off? Am I done? Okay, thank you for that. But the other thing that always bothers me about when I listen to HR people talking about we are not empowered, who is going to empower you? What is your role? And it's almost, to what extent do you actually do what needs to be done? And so, and again, and I'm not blaming, if I come across as that, I apologize, not deeply, just a little bit, but just to say that we talk about being empowered. Who's going to empower us? Maybe let me just leave it at that. But I agree with you around lifting it. It's quite and the thing is, it's also a very emotive phenomenon. It's a very, very emotive thing, and it impacts quite widely even in the organization's results.
One more, and we'll wrap it up.
Good afternoon. Name is Sean Clooney. Did you in your study encounter, because certainly I have, the inverse of bullying? Because we, I think, got the idea that it's always from a seat of typical power, management towards staff or superior towards junior. That's structurally. So I've been in a situation, for instance, where I've been bullied, myself and co-managers been bullied by staff. In my view, due to weak leadership, weak culture, weak performance culture. And I find the same thing, for instance, coming out now with my wife being a high school teacher, is bullying of teachers by, by learners. I don't know if you encountered anything like that in your study.
No, what I encountered was that that's two forms of power. I spoke about power from a position point of view. And the other form of power was by association, where I may not necessarily be in a position of power, but by association I'm married or I know somebody, I have a relationship or friendship or whatever with somebody that's in a very, very powerful position. So that's what I meant by it's power, but it's of a different kind, derived from my being associated to somebody that's in the power. That gives me power, and I've had situations like that. And I think I gave an example of a lady who was an administrator, but was married to a COO and was obviously part of the boss barrage, and was party to some of the information that came here. And she wielded a lot of power and could even bully people that were higher than her, but by power derived from association. Yes? Makes sense? Answer your question? Okay. Thank you very much. I believe that was my last question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Motsei.